Well, thank you very much for that CV. It's rather intimidating to stand up and have a show, which I think may falter at various points. So I think you will have to be patient with me this evening. I should say, first of all, that I don't know whether it's transformative, but I do want to stress that this is a project with a team behind it, and you'll see here that there are others who are distinguished contributors to that project. I particularly pick out Eric Grosso and Sophie McCallum, who are daily working on this project. And the dream team at the bottom includes very distinguished individuals, so we couldn't have a stronger lineup. Our intention is fourfold. One is to produce a published volume called The Atlas of Edinburgh, a hardback. If there's anybody here from the City Council, or has any leverage with the City Council, I'm very keen that this be something which they take on board. One of those books you kindly mentioned was called A Modern History of Leicester. And the City Council there has bought 500. It's a fantastic thing for the city to do that, because it means that it comes out to the citizens at £20, not at 60 or 70 as with the University Press. So I'm really keen that one of our objectives is that the liaison with the Edinburgh City Council, who is supposedly a partner, will in fact prove to be productive in that respect. We also expect to produce an e-atlas, that is, all the stuff that we can't get into the published version, we want to make available. So this will be many historians, because apart from this quintet, myself and the others here, we have many others who've been helping us, providing us with data, information, their expertise, and we expect to be able to produce that and make that available online. I hope I'll be able to show you a third product of the project, and that is to make available tools by which everybody can make maps in relatively few minutes. And the fourth thing really is to have a kind of outreach project in which our OpenStreetMap, which I hope to show you as well, is available free to all comers. So this is a funded project by the AHRC, but the whole emphasis of the project is to make it available to us all, free, online, and a hard copy too. I'm hoping this will work. This is a volume of the proceedings of the Society, and it has in that a list of people who were recently admitted or had over a number of years been admitted to the Society of Antiquaries. What I did with that was abstract those who were not from Edinburgh and make just a very simple spreadsheet. And from that very simple spreadsheet, produced a very simple map. Now, there are some intervening steps in this, which I hope to show later, but it takes very little time once that spreadsheet is in an appropriate form to run it through a geocoder and produce this. You might then say, well, there are some interesting questions here. What happens to great chunks of Edinburgh which are not represented here? Is this an exclusive new town society? You might well ask. And the answer obviously is yes. But the thing is, there's not much of Edinburgh below the board, because this is a map, the Ordnance Survey map, from 1849-50. The Grange is a twinkle in the eye still of the various landowners, and are only a scattering of developments really south of here. And you'll have to trust me, there's no measles or red spots below the board. I haven't cheated. But I did get a list of all your addresses, not your names, but I did ask the Society Secretary for your addresses. If this was live, and I'm not risking it yet, I could actually point to one of these spots and find out what the address is and see if you'd own up to it. I think you'd agree, though, that the distribution's different. Spatial distribution has changed here. It is still got some sort of middle-class bourgeois dimension to it. We're not kidding ourselves here. But certainly the southern districts have become much more visible. But we also have quite a scattering elsewhere, as you can see. In Leith, in Portobello, parts of those who inhabit the Ring Road, and other areas too. So what we want to do is to move in the project is to move from the availability of data of some kind or other to the presentation of spatial material in a manner which asks us questions. Why do these patterns occur? What is it about this distribution that we need to discuss and discover? Because while we always have questions about information, it's not always easy to see with a bunch of addresses what they're really like. So the underlying idea of the project is very much to reuse, and redevelop material in a very, very different way. So many people do digital things these days. Most of them piggyback on somebody else's work. And we do that to some extent, but we create a huge new digital resource. And we do this with two different kinds of data. Point data, you've seen the addresses, I just give you an example, and polygons, areas. So most of our historical data comes in one or other form, doesn't it? We have addresses for all sorts of things, memberships, voters, whatever it is, and we have districts, wards, parishes, registration, sanitary districts, and so forth. So here's an example. Going to the Scottish post office directories, the actual directory is the Edinburgh one. There are a huge number of these. They stand from 1773 down to the 1960s. There are about 6,000 entries in 1773. There are 36,000 in 1910, and they wither a bit as they come to the end and the yellow pages and the telephone book takes over. And what we're doing is trying to develop this resource so that it's searchable. At the moment, you may say, we've seen pictures of the post office directories on the National Library's wonderful site. Yes, you have. They're just pictures. You can't do much with them. They're there, nice to look at, helpful, informative. You can copy them out. That's what you can do. We want to make them searchable. It's a fiendish programming issue to do that. But it does bring up a number of possibilities and a very rich potential if we can bring something like nearly 200 years' worth of directories into play for Edinburgh, and there are 695 such volumes in Scotland as a whole. So if the programming works, and so far it's seeming to do so, then we can release a huge amount of data in new and different ways. So here are the butchers. Now this is just me copying out butchers in 1850, and you get some sense on a modern map of where they're from, where they are. And there they are in 1860, slightly more of them. 1910, 2015. There are a couple of butchers, I guess, in some of the supermarkets, but they don't do everything. So I don't count them. So if I've offended anybody, tradesmen here, I apologize. Now, this is very risky for me here, because this may be where it all goes pear-shaped. So just pray for me at this point. So here we have a map of these medical occupations in 1910. And I'm going to leave them with GPs at the moment. Now, the context for this, the historical context, I'm inclined to make a joke about age at this point, but I shan't, was when Lloyd George was Chancellor of the Exchequer, attempting to develop social insurance. 1908 and 1911, important bills went through Parliament for that purpose. And critical to that was an attempt to finance this social welfare by creaming off the betterment, the price inflation of houses, property inflation. So the inflation of house values, he was going to cream that off and use it to pay for social insurance. So we have wonderful cadastral surveys. They're called the New Doomsday Book. And these are wonderful surveys. They're buried in the Scottish Records Office, and they're not digitised. It's a fantastic resource, and we should do this. We won't in our project. But you can see Lloyd George's problem here, that all the doctors are all in one place. Don't get ill is the message in Calton or St James's or around the Canongate, Dunby Dykes, Abbey Hill even. All this area is undoctored. And it didn't make much difference if you were a dentist. It's pretty much the same. So swathes of Edinburgh are not serviced by GPs, by physicians. But look at the pharmacists. That's a different distribution. I'd never have guessed. I mean, we know that from our historiography, but I'd never have guessed that just by looking at the addresses. So here, they're still not doing a great deal at the bottom end of the Canongate or down Low Calton. And there is not much in Greenside either. But the distribution is very, very different throughout the city. And that's the sort of thing which I think the project is really interesting in revealing. Things that we kind of knew, but when we look at hundreds of observations like this, then we're in a better position to understand them. So we have point data, and we also have area data. Now, Paul Laxton and I, Paul sitting in the audience, co-wrote Insanitary City. I'm going to show you a picture as a promo in a moment. And we were astonished at how fragmented Edinburgh is as a jurisdiction. We talk about it as though it's a coherent unitary state. Neither coherent nor unitary until, well, if ever. But notice how, in this evidence, given in relation to the passage of a bill attempting to unify Edinburgh in 1848, Mr. Logan, who's one of the select committee inquiring of some witnesses about this particular issue, is trying to understand the jurisdictional complication of Edinburgh in the 1840s. So he's asking the witness, how many wards are there in the police boundaries? 32. And then he goes on about the borough, the parliamentary and electoral purposes. 11 wards, the witness says. And what about municipal elections? 5 wards. And then he does his sums looking at the wards in the southern districts, and says, so there are 56 different wards in Edinburgh. It's a matrix of complicated jurisdictions. And the result of this, Paul and I discovered, was it was quite, well, we found an example where there was a shopkeeper in Southbridge. His brother was another shopkeeper a few hundred yards along Nicholson Street. They were subjected to different inspectorates and sentenced by different magistrates' courts. You could hit a 7-iron between one and the other. Now, many of these things don't seem very significant. But when you kind of work out the implications, it actually makes the administration of the city very complicated. And I'll show you this in a map in a moment, I hope. But 3/5 of the city weren't qualified to be councillors because they didn't live in the city. They were in Calton, Canongate and Portsborough. So the burdens of office revolve on a very small group of people in the 1840s and later, at a time when municipal administration is growing exponentially and increasingly complicated. So there's an issue of equity, about participation, about accountability, which lies behind some of these jurisdictions. So just have a look at what we were discovering when we looked at Insanitary City. Available from all good booksellers. So here's one of the maps, which I think you'll agree shows a fair degree of complication. And we'll just zoom in. The blue bit, as it says at the top there, is the district parishes of the city. But what I want you to pick out is that in these blue areas, there are islands in which people were being administered by this blue city area, yet they were surrounded by St Cuthbert's, a completely different jurisdiction. Here in the west and the east are Portsborough. They're tacked on, but there's also a widowed bit of that, as there is these chunks belong to South Leith. Yet this is the jurisdiction of the parliamentary Edinburgh. So you have a very complicated pattern of jurisdictions here. You can see it better here. So the chunks here of land lumped together as though they were coherent give us the basis of our statistics often by ward or by parish. And yet, people in the Canongate and Portsborough and so forth were not entitled to hold office. So Paul and I pondered this, and we showed how the police commissioners and the city councillors had very different kinds of constituencies, and that a whole bunch of different areas were part of the administrative district. For us in Mesh, this is hellish, because we need to know where the lines are for all these boundaries to heap in the data that we've got to make any sense of this. And this has been one of the most demanding aspects of the project. Where are these boundaries, and how can we relate our published data and our research to them? Here are Little John's sanitary districts in 1865, durable for another 20 or so years. And Paul got agitated counting buyers and who's. But you see, you wouldn't know this. We had no idea about how widespread animals in the city really were, yet there were thousands of horses and thousands of cows and thousands of disease-ridden animals in the city, all over the city. So the spatial aspect of the data is absolutely crucial. And though we can read some of these things in tables, it doesn't necessarily give us a spatial extent of how things worked. We couldn't do our work in Mesh, and I think you probably enjoy the National Library's wonderful digitized and in some cases georeferenced maps. And if you haven't played with them, you're missing life. Just fantastic to have all of these many, many maps. I'm only going to extol their praises and so forth at this stage, but there are so many of these. These are live links, so I can actually pull up any one of these at any stage. I'm not going to risk it now because of the problems I've had earlier, and you'll just have to trust me. But what a wonderful panoply of digital maps for us to use and to work our data around. So whenever we've got something for a particular year, there's always a fairly decent map to which we can relate it. I'll maybe come back to these later, either if there are questions about them or if you just want to have a demo. Now, polygons and areas. One of the best things, I think, to come out of our project, although I can't show you everything and the data at this stage, is that I really feel that Michael Lynch, in conjunction with Eric Grosso, have nailed our parishes, 16th century parishes. I don't think we'll improve on this. They have pondered the boundaries. They have, the council will be annoyed to know, redefined where some of the city walls were, in conjunction with the archaeology that's recently been done in this. And I'm confident that we will not get more convincing parish data into which we will pour, into the containers in which we'll pour here. So here are these changing parish boundaries, in this instance superimposed on a modern map, 1592, 1697, and 1693, when Canongate gets absorbed into this. And these lines are fascinating, and we've gone further with this into the 19th century to show how parishes gain bits and lose bits, that some object to being part of the annuity tax to the church and want to be shipped out or brought in. We see islands in Broughton that don't want to have anything to do with the city whatsoever. So there's some really interesting things coming out of the project in relation to the boundaries of the city. Michael Lynch has taken this further by dividing, well, he didn't divide them, but he's discovered where what are called the quarters and the thirds exist as well. These were where the subdivisions of the parishes materialized in relation to the creation of new churches or simply breaking up administrative districts so that they could be manageable as population expanded somewhat. So this will, I'm convinced, produce some really fascinating material on the early modern period. Now here I do have to just take my chances. So this is how we've been trying to proceed. OpenStreetMap is what it says. It's free. It's a resource that we've created amongst our team and a few volunteers. It is the best, most complete map, most accurate map in the public domain in the UK without a shadow of doubt. So much so that even last week, Glasgow City Council asked if I go over and talk to them because they've got all the money and we want to have some of it. There's a big city deal, big data. They haven't got much in their big data centre, but they've got a lot of money in their big data centre. So we're poaching if we can. So the thing to look for here, I think the link is a bit slow, but we'll leave it. It might. I'll just talk around it while I can. On the left-hand side, you have the standard OpenStreetMap format. You go to anywhere on your browser, put in OpenStreetMap, one word, and you'll get a map of whichever town you want to go to. and it'll have nothing much there. It'll have these kind of outlines of buildings over here, these geometrical shapes, but there's nothing there, just the shapes. And that's why you have problems also with Google, that it's okay at the level of the street. It's rubbish if you want to find out where on the street you're going to go. And if it's possible here, just to get a bit more detail, we might just be able to see what we've been doing. And I can assure you that when it says 34 there, and 40 and 60 and 54 and so forth, the numbers are all there. I just need to zoom in a bit further. That they are. They're on the door. So our methodology is to walk around Edinburgh. We don't put the numbers on the door, but we put them on the map where the door is. And the result of this is to produce very, very precise locations. Precise to 1 metre. And that's as good as it is actually with the OS as well. The difference being that you have to pay a subscription if you want to be with the OS, and you don't with OpenStreetMap. So that's what we've done throughout the city. And when you come to look at the city centre, there's a huge amount of commercial interest. So this is what you get before in 2013. That's the sort of thing you'll get with Google. But actually, what's there is far richer. So we've got all the shops, all the functions and types of shops, clothing, boozing, and carousing. So there's a level of detail here which is incredibly helpful to us, because when we come to map our historical data, it goes where it's meant to go. And this is the case right across the city. So over here, you'll see the same. I didn't really mean to go here because some of these shapes are incomplete, because we're still working on these gardens. But you can see that by splitting up the properties, we have a very fine grain of what's there. I'll come back to this, and you have to pray again. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see that Google, when it codes data, sticks it in the road quite often. We know that perfectly well. But when you go to OpenStreetMap and Geocoder, it's always at the front of the building, because that's where the door is. And when you go to the Ordnance Survey map, which only updates twice a year, sometimes only once a year, depending where you are, then it's a bit out of date, and they use the centroid. That is, they plonk the dot in the middle of the plot, which is okay, but has problems. The Royal Commission, RCAMS, for example, has discovered that quite a large proportion of its listed buildings aren't where they are meant to be, because sometimes plots get amalgamated. So if you look for, say, 2, 4, and 6 Hanover Street, you won't get them, because though they were there in the past, they're not just one shop now, and that becomes one address, and the listed building may only show one address. So comparing OpenStreetMap and the City Council's Ordnance Survey is pretty good. There's not much between those, but I think there's something to be preferred by having them at the street where you go in, rather than plonked in the middle of the plot like this. This is really important to us too, because over here there are no licensing restrictions other than acknowledging OpenStreetMap contributors. So that's a free good, no restrictions other than that acknowledgement. So actually we're in a very exposed commercial position, a lot of people wanting to steal or use the data we've collected in OpenStreetMap and download it. And if we're lucky, we'll see how you can do that. But for others, Google's geocoder is subject to serious restrictions, and they can and have taken down some of the tools that they have immediately. And what's more, if you do produce anything from Google, they have the intellectual property rights over that. And if you do otherwise, then you infringe that and are transgressing copyright law. So anyone who produces something on a Google map runs those risks. Using the OpenStreet geocoder or any other element, as long as you say it's an OpenStreet thing, there is no problem. And the Ordnance Survey, as I say, is fantastic, but it's subjected to a number of limitations in terms of subscription. So this is what we do. We are streetwalkers. We have walked, somebody has now calculated 5 times to London and back. And the trouble is, you may go up one side and down the other, but sure as damn it, there'll be something you forgot. So you have to do it again and check it, and we do quite a lot of that. So our sheets, many sheets, begin to look like this. This is in fairly central area, St Vincent Place here, Dundas Street on this side. It's a bit skew-whiff as a map. And the process then requires us to take that previous data and draw it on top of the map. I should have had a test at this point to ask you where it was, but putting Corstorphine at the top was a bit of a giveaway. So these are a number of plots which I surveyed in a couple of days. They then go back into our office, and somebody has to draw every one of these, each one of which has probably got about 10 little points or nodes. Here's Portobello by the Sea, and it turns into this. So there's a huge amount of labour involved. In fact, this is what we've done, not just walking to London and back. We've enhanced 90,000 properties, buildings in the city, out of a total in Edinburgh of 107,000. That's what we've done. We've done the same with addresses. 93% of the addresses are ones we've put on. So overall, we're creating a huge amount on this new OpenStreetMap. And I guarantee that if you use it, as long as at the moment, because we've still got some bits of the outer edges to do, it will map what you want. Now this is part of the commercial, and you should take this lesson away, please, and shout as loud as you like. But we're always being told of this, how strapped we are financially in local government and institutions, public life. But in 2002, the Danish government released all its addresses. They thought, they've been proved right, that this was a huge benefit in terms of administration, in terms of deliveries, of Amazon, and all those other things which are helpful, where you can link databases through an address. Now that is absolutely critical to the activities of public, of council offices and public administration. And if we could link all these things, we would make significant gains, according to the Danish government. So in 2002, they liberate all their data, and then they think a few years later, was it a good idea? So they did some estimates. Anyone who's keen to read their data can come back to me, and I'll give you that link. Very, very thorough piece of research. They came up the fact that 14 million euros at a cost of 0.2 million euros was the benefit that accrued to the country. I have to say I think the ratio is high, but I'm just using it because why should I criticise the Danish government after all? And it suits my purpose. So doing this, scaling that ratio to the UK population would produce a benefit of 110 million annually to the country. And if you did this scale to Edinburgh, you saw that we had 80,000 addresses and 500,000 population here using their ratio, 30:1. This is the dividend that this kind of open data produces to the economy. So the Chamber of Commerce is interested in having the data updated because, after all, the tourists want to know where they can get a newspaper or a pint of milk or whatever it is they want. And OpenStreetMap does that for them. We've had many people say to us, it's been incredibly useful as a visitor to the city. So in terms of crude economic benefit, Edinburgh will gain significantly, probably already, if these figures are true, more than we've spent doing it. So the city government really should think about this seriously. And if the Scottish government had any sense, they would look at the plots, the polygons that we've created, and Lloyd George would be delighted, because that could be the basis of a much more equitable taxation system, based on, at least as part of the algorithm, on what your property extent is. And kind of for people like me who like to look back at the 19th century, that's what the rates did, tried to take some account of the footprint that you had and the amenity value that you got out of it. So going back to that picture of Grossart or Portobello or wherever, with all those polygons, would be an equitable way of looking at taxation. And I just mention this because, again, it reinforces the point that the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills thought that the open national address data set was something beneficial. Substantial, valuable growth. Recommendation is that as a basic address product should be free to all users at the point of use. Now, to take this example to various people in the city government, this is their a map of their licenses for tables and chairs. I know it's not historically perhaps the most critical thing that you've come to listen in this venerable hall, but nonetheless, here they have a map. They have no idea, when we went along, they had no idea where they were. They do nothing about it. And yet, they've asked people to go through this process. So if you want to set up a cafe, you're supposed to have and a pavement service, you're supposed to have a license. Many don't. They don't check. So I'm just giving you that heads up should any of you think that your lump sum pension should go to some other purpose. Now, the Scottish Post Office directories I've explained are a fantastic resource. And we're trying to do something about this, as I explained. And this is what they look like. Well, this is how part of it, the sort of professional register, appears. So these are people who are resident in the city and practicing solicitors. And there are pages and pages of them. But you could do this, I have done this, for butchers and bakers, but not for candlestick makers yet. And so there's a spreadsheet. And then I hope it works. So here are the solicitors in 1861. And without further ado, we're going to just geocode them. So there's a piece of programming that sits behind this. This is just what you and I use You don't need to worry about anything else. It just does it for you. Once you've got this in the right format. So, remember, these are the solicitors, and this is very important to my point. These are solicitors in 1861. Now they're heavily concentrated in the northern New Town, the second New Town, north of Heriot Row. There are a few of them down here around the western New Town. So let's try again. This is for 1911. Bated breath in the audience. Will it work? Where are they? Where have they gone? Heriot Row is devoid of solicitors, but they've all moved into the other side, on the other side of Queen Street Gardens. I mean, there are a number around Rutland Square and so on. So the question is why? By tracing the spatial arrangement here, we've got a whole bunch of questions to ask. Why does this migration take place between 1861 and 1911? I'm encouraged to think of answers on more than a postcard, because I think there's quite a lot of complication in this. But my hunch, and it's not much more than that, though I have looked at the 1911 directories quite a lot, is that budge, nudge and grudge, as I think of these Dickensian solicitors, have been required to amalgamate because the law has become more complicated. The family solicitor cannot deal with the complication of wills and other personal estates and so forth, and therefore they begin to amalgamate in the way that I've suggested. But the important point for me, and I hope for you, is that from that spreadsheet we have got a map. And we've got a map that makes us address serious historical questions. And I think produce possible answers, at least avenues for exploration. So here are those two things side by side now to show that transition. And we've got several hundred of these solicitors here. So as you can see, it's a serious migration. I think there are lots of other interesting explanations. For example, the growth of the financial quarter south of St Andrew's Square and around York Place, a huge expansion in that financial quarter in that 50 years, so bids up the prices that it has two effects. It forces people out of their private homes and into suburbia, and it means the solicitors also are vying with the investment and agents and analysts in an effort to, if they want to retain that part of the city, particularly around St Andrew's Square. Now, these are some of the things that we produced as a resource for our purposes in the project, producing deep reserves of information, cartographic information, historical information for general use. But we do fun things too. So here are multiple screens. And lost Edinburgh. See if I can go back here. So it's interesting for us, and I think this is the time-wasting aspect of the National Library's wonderful maps, is that you can look at them and compare them. So I've got Edgar on the left and here's Ainsley on the right. And look at them in comparison, one with another. We did discover the hall. I've forgotten where, well, I know where it is, but I can't see it on the map. It's just down from St. Giles. So here, sorry. I don't know why I'm looking at that one. So here is the likely position of the Society of Antiquaries' initial home when it had its own home. What we didn't say, Simon, the other day was this is actually the poultry market, and it must have stunk like. So we can go to 2 maps, we can look at 4 and see these changes by looking at them at different times. I won't do that, it just takes time. But it's a facility to make inspection and observe something, just observing it, to see the changes over time. And I think there are lots of those kind of fun things to do, which we can do. I like this for students, so I'll just give you a quick demo. On the left-hand side, we'll have the first Ordnance Survey map, and here we'll have the second Ordnance Survey map in 1876. So we've got 1850 about and 1875-6 on the other side. And I'm going to zoom in to get to the Tron, which is exactly there. So on the left, 1849-50, there's that poultry market. There is. Now look here as we make our new Coburn Street. Now it's very, very revealing, I think, to show the route of that. We know where it goes. But look, it starts here. Here is the North Bridge Arcade. So you can see that through there, and then it comes through the old fruit market, cuts round by the poultry and veal market, which has changed, and goes through here, goes through here, the bleaching green, and down to come out, of course, on the bottom of the street. So just have a look at that again, because you may think I'm very critical of the City Council, but they didn't do this scheme, although about 4,000 people were evicted. But it's clever, it's really clever, because it uses an open market, straightens out here to produce a building line of some reasonable construction, and give it the coherence that it now has, crosses the bleaching green, and comes out opposite the new Waverley Bridge. And this sort of thing, we can do the same if you insist for Jeffrey Street and so on. But that sort of inspection, I think, is really helpful. Now, I'm very aware of the passage of time here. We've taken, I don't think I'll do this right now, but I'm happy to do so afterwards. Facebook has a wonderful collection of Lost Edinburgh pictures. And many of these are many of these that we've seen before in other collections, but many of them are from individuals in the community, which are not just about the great sites in Edinburgh, the historic sites. So its participatory nature is intriguing because you can get pictures from all over the city and bring these together. And that's what we've tried to do in that part of the project. So I could show you all the pictures of Dunby Dykes that exist on Facebook, or all the ones of St John's Road, and so forth. And this I think, gives a wider interest in historical materials to the population of Edinburgh, not just to those who come along to Antiquaries meetings. So I just want to finish by saying that often, building out of that point about the democratizing aspect of Facebook's images, that we often think of our public administration in a very hierarchical way, with the city engineer or the architect, and at the end of the day, through the planner or the urban designer, the public picks up whatever is developed or delivered. I'm a firm believer that people have strong place attachments to their area, to their neighbourhood. And I think it's really part of this project to bring some of that participation in their community back to them. So one of the tools that we've developed but not really presented yet is to show those planning activities, the proposals which the City Council has on its frightful website, to bring them together within a radius of your house. You may not want to use it ever, fine, but if you knew that within 300 or 500 or whatever numbers you wanted in a radius around your house, these things were going on, it's that kind of thing that the mapping in a contemporary world can deliver. And so one of these tools, just like that, is something that we've developed, and it's sort of sitting there, and we want to try and bring that back into the public arena so that it uses the map, it uses data that is in the public domain, and it is actually useful to the community. So I want to just leave that thought with you, that actually OpenStreetMap, the tools and the effort which my fantastic colleagues have been developing, is something which I think has much greater significance than we ever thought when we started off on this course. And I hope that within the space of maybe 6 months, this is the kind of thing that you've had an early warning about, and will acquire your data sets and begin to enjoy mapping them by, say, the middle of next year. So thank you for listening to my enthusiasms, and I hope that we all enjoy OpenStreetMap and what it has to deliver. Thank you.